we're going to get started. All right. I've asked a friend to come up and read an excerpt from A Vision for You.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm an alcoholic. A vision for you. You are going to meet these new friends in your own community. Near you, alcoholics are dying helplessly like people in a sinking ship. If you live in a large place, there are hundreds. High and low, rich and poor, these are future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will escape disaster together, and you will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. It may seem incredible that these men are to become happy, respected, and useful once more. How can they rise out of such misery, bad repute, and hopelessness? The practical answer is that since these things have happened among us, they can happen with you. Should you wish them above all else and be willing to make use of our experience, we are sure they will come. The age of miracles is still with us. Our own recovery proves that. Our hope is that when this ship of a book is launched on the world tide of alcoholism, defeated drinkers will seize upon it to follow its suggestions. Many, we are sure, will rise to their feet and march on. They will approach the still other sick ones, and fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous may spring up in each city and hamlet, havens for those who must find a way out.
Please help me welcome Scott from the Design for Living group in New Jersey.
What she said. I took my best lines. My name is Scott, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be alive, sober, and recovered. I want to thank the committee or whoever, Brad and Teddy and whoever else was involved putting this thing together and having us out. I want to thank Chris for sharing with us tonight. I've been asked to talk about Vision for You. Now, I'm not a historian, but I know who the players were in Vision for You. If you haven't read A Vision for You in the back of the book, I would beg you to read it, because I believe it's a testimony to God's ways and God's reasons. And what I mean by that is that God puts all the pieces and players in place, so that we get to have a spiritual experience. And I'm sure by the time Bill Wilson passed in the 70s that he got to see that this vision became much more than he could have ever imagined. The way we have it today is nothing like it was when Bill got sober, or even when he wrote this book. You'd get this book mailed to you, typically, and you would read the book and have an experience with the book with yourself, and maybe read inventory to a priest or someone you trusted, and then try to carry that message to alcoholics. Seek them out in asylums and whatever kind of drug or alcohol-related hospital ward was available in your town. Or maybe you didn't have that. I mean, in Philadelphia before COVID, Chris hit it, man. Like, meetings are... Now, I have a home group at Design for Living in Neptune, New Jersey, Sunday night, 7 o'clock. There's still a couple of hundred people there, but it was a bigger meeting before COVID. I remember, I grew up in Philadelphia, and that's where my home group was before I moved to New Jersey. There were 1,600 meetings a week available to anybody who wanted to get up off the couch and go to a meeting in the Philadelphia area. 1,600 meetings a week. I'm not sure how many are out there now. After COVID, a lot of meetings just never picked up. But there were no meetings when Bill wrote this book, other than the little gatherings they had amongst themselves. And small groups that were popping up, and one popped up in a home You could almost say that would be the first clubhouse. Thank you, Dave, for the readers. I forgot the readers. Elizabeth said to me, she goes, "Did you remember your belt this time?" And I'm like, I have it, but I had to run and grab one. I forgot my belt. I forget things. Anyway, so I'm going to read Vision for You. And like I said, if you haven't read this chapter, please do. If you don't believe there's a God putting things together, and I mean even in our own personal lives, I couldn't have chose my life. I wouldn't have chosen my life. And I certainly wouldn't have chosen many of the events that have gotten me here today with you. God's reasons and God's ways, we don't know what they're going to be. I mean, geez, a couple Christmases ago, I had a horrific event, my wife and I, and it turned out it saved my life. I found out I was very, very sick by having an accident. Found out I had cancer. I wouldn't have found that out if it wasn't for that accident. I didn't have any symptoms. So if this guy didn't meet, you hear the expression seconds and inches. A couple inches that way, or a few seconds early, or a few seconds late, and you missed the bus. And if this guy didn't meet that guy and didn't meet that guy, or this guy took a drink, we wouldn't be here. And this chapter makes that very, very clear, that God played a role in everything and does. Is God everything or nothing? What's our choice to be? Now that we're here, we have the opportunity to recover like no one ever has in history. With the people in this room that have enough knowledge and experience with this book, that if you're sitting here tonight and you're just not sure, Chris said he didn't know what he was up against. I don't think any of us do coming through these doors. And we get so wrapped up in the fellowship and her because she looks nice, because the girls are cute and the guys, we want to be charming and handsome and all that. We get wrapped up in that stuff. I find out you're not that cute, and you find out I'm not that charming, So, that's a vision for Scott. A whole other chapter on that. So chapter 11, a vision for you. For most normal folks, drinking means conviviality, companionship, and colorful imagination. They're the people that we know that drink and don't destroy their lives. And we keep trying to drink like them, right? It means release from care, boredom, and worry. It is joyous intimacy with friends and a feeling that life is good. But not so with us in those last days of heavy drinking. Old pleasures were gone. They were but memories. Never could we recapture the great moments of the past. There was an insistent yearning to enjoy life as we once did, and a heartbreaking obsession that some new miracle of control would enable us to do it. There was always one more attempt and one more failure. The less people tolerated us, the more we withdrew from society, from life itself, as we became subjects of King Alcohol, shivering denizens of his mad realm, the chilling vapor that is loneliness settled down. I love the way Bill writes. It thickened, ever becoming blacker. Some of us sought out sordid places, hoping to find understanding, companionship, and approval, or just somebody who wasn't going to challenge us on the way we were living. Momentarily we did. Then would come oblivion and the awful awakening to face the hideous four horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. I call that the vulture on the bedpost. That may be there in the morning tomorrow when I wake up. I don't know. What am I going to do about it? Unhappy drinkers who read this page will understand. Now, that was my life when I was separated from alcohol almost 19 years ago. I was a fugitive of justice. I couldn't go out of my house except at night because detectives were snooping around. I couldn't sit on my front stoop. Not a chance, not in daylight. Because if the detectives came down the street looking I was a fugitive of justice for years. And I knew I was going to go to prison for a very long time. And I would leave the house to go pull a score or to get booze. And that was it. And that was the little world I lived in. Right? Talk about the four horsemen. That was my life. And to sit in my house and live that life in that self-constructed prison, which I can do here sober as well, construct my own prison of self. I lived in this prison in my home, and I wasn't quite sure what to do about it. Wasn't sure what to do about it. Until the marshals came and took me out of my home. See, I wouldn't have chosen to, I'm not a quitter. I wouldn't have chosen to go to an AA meeting, although I knew they were there. I wouldn't have chosen to go to rehab. I couldn't have talked myself into doing that. God sent the marshals to separate, to interrupt my death, to get me here. I had to be separated from alcohol. I don't know what your story looks like. But now and then, a serious drinker being dry at the moment says, I don't miss it at all. Feel better, work better, having a better time. An ex-problem drinker, as ex-problem drinkers, we smile at such a sally. We know our friend is like a boy whistling in the dark to keep up his spirits. So when I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we might call it a pink cloud and all this nonsense, or I'm dating her, or I'm out there or going to the gym, all that stuff, I didn't go to the gym for my health. I went to the gym to be more attractive to the opposite sex, to be more intimidating to the people I had to go to collect money, stuff like that. All right? And it was a whistling in the dark. And it was just a matter of time before old King Alcohol whispered in my ear, suddenly showed up, and I was out the door. So there are a lot of different ways to whistle in the dark around here. So us ex-problem drinkers, we smile at such a sally. We know our friend is whistling in the dark. He fools himself. Inwardly, he would give anything to take a dozen drinks and get away with them. He will presently try the old game again, for he isn't happy about his sobriety. He cannot picture life without alcohol. Someday he will be unable to imagine life either with alcohol or without it. Then he will know loneliness such as few do. He will be at the jumping off place. He will wish for the end. No program in my life. I've been there. That's where I was maybe between 3 and 4 years separated from alcohol. I had a beautiful wife. I had a beautiful house. My son was back in my life. I was a stand-up guy again. I had no sponsor. I had no 12 steps. Which is what this fellowship really centered around in the beginning, was the 12 steps. There was none of this speaker discussion stuff, and you just come in and hang out and go to diners, which is all great stuff. But if I don't get involved in my own recovery at some point, very soon, on my way in the door, I'm in serious trouble. And that's where I was, and I can't believe, like I said, God does for me what I could never do for myself. And, if I'm living my life for His reasons, and He's working in His ways, I'm not going to understand Him. Why did God keep me sober? Almost 4 years. And I was so miserable. I was ready for the end. I wanted to put my brains on the wall sober, and I would have died of alcoholism without a drink. Because I didn't understand. When Chris said he didn't understand what he was up against, man, I get it. How could I came into Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, my name's Scott, I'm an alcoholic. I did it for years. I didn't even know what it meant to be an alcoholic. I had no idea about the phenomenon of craving. I had no idea about powerless in the mind before the first drink. I didn't know why suddenly would show up. I'd get a couple of years sober, a couple of months, so it didn't matter what it was. Eventually, suddenly would show up, my mind would talk me into a drink and destroy my life. And I had no idea why. So He will wish for the end. I've been there. And to be honest, it was guys like Chris, our friend Peter, Don P., my friend Jimmy. I met Jimmy at the conference I met my sponsor at. Because I was dying and I was willing to do anything to recover from alcoholism. Having gotten all those things that our minds tell us are going to make us happy. And when I stopped drinking, I ran into Scott. And not the Scott that God created, but the Scott created. That's what I ran into when I stopped drinking. And it told me what to do and how to do it and who to do it with and all this wonderful stuff that was going to make me happy until I wanted to put my brains on the wall. So much for the pink cloud. We have shown how we got out from under. You say, yes, I am willing, but am I to be consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum, like some righteous people I see? So now right away, I'm going to decide what's right and wrong for me. It's really my illness that's making up excuses for me not to get well, whether I believe it or not. All the reasons that I have for not getting a program going in my life, not asking somebody to sponsor me. What, am I going to be a religious person? Alcoholism loves to speak to us. It pursues me. Okay. I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? Yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. It's a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. Right? Working a program was the fellowship when this first started. The word fellowship means community of interest, activity, or experience. Their common community in the beginning was that they were working the program that they had. In the very beginning, it was 6 principles from the Oxford group. Bill turned it into 12 steps. 1939, he writes the book. Everything is in there. But at the point where he was writing this book, that hadn't been launched yet. He had been working with this stuff for 4 years. Whatever program they had, that was what the fellowship centered around. Not diners and, all that stuff may or may not have happened. But these guys were doing work. How is that to come about, you ask? Where am I to find these people? You are going to meet these new friends in your own community. Near you, alcoholics are dying helplessly like people in a sinking ship. If you live in a large place, there are hundreds. High and low, rich and poor, these are future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties. For you will escape disaster together, and you will commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself, that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. I will be transformed, begin to be transformed. And among this group, I will find lifelong friends. Now, I'm not going to be friends with every single person in the room. It's not every one of us is going to jump on the same path. But there's going to be people, and there have been in Alcoholics Anonymous that I've met. Jimmy's one of them. If Jimmy was in California and called me up at 3 a.m. and said, I need you, I'd go gas the car. They're the kinds of people that I've met in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have them all over the country. I just hope they don't all call up and say, come on, you know what I mean? I won't be able to get there. But what are you going to do? It may seem incredible that these men are to become happy, respected, and useful once more. How can they rise out of such misery, bad repute, and hopelessness? The practical answer is that since these things have happened among us, they can happen with you. Should you wish them above all else and be willing to make use of our experience, to practice this program, to put it first. Realizing that nothing else of any value in my life is going to stand the test of time unless I put my program first. You can kiss it all goodbye. I've walked out of marriages. I've walked away from relationships with friends. I've blown up everything I could in sobriety early on because I didn't put this first. I had no program. We are, okay. Should you wish them above all else and be willing to make use of our experience, we are sure they will come to you. The age of miracles is still with us. Our own recovery proves that. I knew that when I met my sponsor, guys like Jimmy, guys like my friend Peter, guys like, who else was there at the Tom Needham. God bless him. I believed that these guys were having an experience. I knew they were. I could see the way they carried themselves. It wasn't just a talking head like Terrence and Phillip. You know, I knew that these guys like Chris, when I would hear them do workshops, I knew that these guys were talking about something that was real and it was tangible when I met them, and I could see how they treated me and they treated each other. I knew it. Their recovery proved it. Our hope is that when this chip of a book, this little chip of a book, Bill had no idea what was going to happen with this chip of a book. Many millions are now recovered. I hope that when this chip of a book is launched on the world, tide of alcoholism, defeated drinkers will seize upon it. To follow its suggestions, right, to work these steps. Many, we are sure, will rise to their feet and march on. They will approach still other sick ones, and fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous may, he says, may spring up. 1,600 meetings a week in Philadelphia when I lived there. And this is so far back, in the very beginning, he says they may spring up. Some vision. Okay, may spring up in each city, hamlet, havens for those who must find a way out. May. Bill didn't even know. And I'm glad he got to see it, though. He did long enough to get to see where this fellowship was headed. In the chapter, Working with Others, you gathered an idea of how we approach and aid others to health. And I mean, if you read Working with Others, it's nothing like today. We find our pigeons, they call them sometimes, we find sponsees and people to help at meetings. These guys were going into asylums, man, and hospitals. They were in the trenches. Suppose now that through you, several families have adopted this way of life. They also introduced Al-Anon to the family back then. Even back in the 70s, like when my sponsor got sober in 73, an Al-Anon showed up to talk to his wife. You called AA hotline and they sent out an alcoholic and an Al-Anon to your house. I wonder if that still happens. So suppose now that through you, right, through us, several families have adopted this way of life. You will want to know more of how to proceed from that point. Perhaps the best way of treating you to a glimpse of your future will be to describe the growth of the fellowship among us, right? Here is a brief account. This is as of 1939. And he speaks of himself as alcoholic number one. Years ago in 1935, one of our number, Bill, made a journey to a certain western city, Akron, Ohio. From a business standpoint, the trip came off badly. Had he been successful in his enterprise, he would have been set up on his feet financially, which he desperately tried to do since the day he got sober. Which at the time seemed vitally important, right? It seemed life-saving, life-giving to him. It seemed vitally important, but his venture wound up in a lawsuit and bogged down completely. It was a disaster. The proceeding was shot through with much hard feeling and controversy. Bitterly discouraged, he found himself in a strange place. I was bitterly discouraged the other day. Wherever all my troubles seemed so very real and so big. And I was on the road and I reached out to God and I did what it is the program suggests we do, and suddenly my problems were right-sized. They were nothing. So Bill is bitterly discouraged. He found himself in a strange place, discredited and almost broke. Still physically weak and sober but a few months. Right? This guy's sober like 6 months. Still physically weak, sober but a few months, he saw that his predicament was dangerous. He wanted so much to talk with someone, but whom? See, I picked up my cell phone and I called somebody that I 10-step with when I was right where Bill was. Almost broke. My problems seemed taller than the clouds. Now here's Bill from New York. He's in Akron, Ohio. His business dealing just went into the toilet. He's an alcoholic without a fellowship to speak of at all. No big book, no sponsor, no steps. And he finds himself in this seemingly hopeless position, and he knows he's on thin ice. He's in a dangerous place. Inches and seconds. Bitterly discouraged, he wanted so much to talk with someone, but whom? One dismal afternoon, he paced a hotel lobby. This is the Mayflower Hotel. He paced a hotel lobby, wondering how his bill was to be paid. At one end of the room stood a glass-covered directory of local churches. Down the lobby, a door opened to an attractive bar. He could see the gay crowd inside. In there, he would find companionship and relief. It wasn't a gay bar. It was happy people, okay? Not that there's anything wrong with a gay bar. But this is back in 1939. In there, he would find companionship and release. Unless he took some drinks, he might not have the courage to scrape an acquaintance, and he would have a very lonely weekend, right? So Bill's starting to feel a little sorry for himself, perhaps. Of course he couldn't drink, but why not sit hopefully at a table? A bottle of ginger ale before him, perhaps, right? After all, had he not been sober 6 months now? Perhaps he could handle, say, here it comes, right? Here comes my mind, my best friend that I listen to far too often. Maybe he could have a couple, just say 3 drinks, no more. Fear gripped him. He was on thin ice. Again, it was the old insidious insanity, that first drink. With a shiver, he turned away and walked down the lobby to the church directory. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar, right? And it's still coming after him. The desire to drink, or the illness that wants to get him to drink, it's like following him down that hall. But what about his responsibilities, his family, and the men who would die because they would not know how to get well? Ah, yes, those other alcoholics. Like, what newcomer thinks like that? There must be many right? There must be many in this town. He would phone a clergyman. His sanity returned, and he thanked God. Now, what if Bill would have taken a drink? None of us would be sitting here more than likely. Unless God picked some other crusader to, start a fellowship. Selecting a church at random from the directory, he stepped into a booth and lifted the receiver, right? Service to others was going to pull Bill out of this predicament. He called to the clergyman. His call to the clergyman led him presently to a certain resident of the town who, though formerly able and respected, was then nearing the nadir of alcoholic despair. This is Dr. Bob Smith, alcoholic number 2. It was the usual situation, right? Home in jeopardy, wife ill, children distracted, bills in arrears, and standing damage. And standing damaged. His standing in the community, his reputation. He had a desperate desire to stop, but saw no way out, for he had earnestly tried many avenues of escape. Painfully aware of being somehow abnormal, the man did not fully realize what it meant to be alcoholic. He did not understand what he was up against. Like I don't think any of us do walking through that door. I knew I had a problem drinking, and I knew some way, somehow, I was going to have to stop forever drinking. I had no idea how that was going to happen. I'd never been able to pull that off before. no matter how great my desire was, I always picked up a drink. Suddenly showed up, I drank. Now this time, I don't know how, but I knew that unless God wanted me drunk, I was done. I was done drinking. When those marshals took me away, I didn't thank them at first, but I thanked them. I thanked them for saving my life. They interrupted my death, and I knew it. And I said, you guys just saved my life. I was belly chained, feet shackled, hands in the back of a Jeep. Looked like they took it out of the impound yard, and then we drove around Philadelphia picking up some more of my pals. You know? It was like a fugitive task force thing they were doing. And I thanked them for saving my life. And I remember the one looking at me, and he's like, who's this guy? You know? That wasn't how you were acting a minute ago. But I knew God showed up. The day before that, I prayed to God to help me. I was drinking in my house. I knew I couldn't stop. I knew I was never going to stop. I just couldn't stop. And I said, God, please help me. And then the woman I was with, she came through the door with a bottle of booze for me and some other stuff for herself, and I forgot all about God. The next morning, rap on the door. And I never do this. I looked out the window. I know I lived as a fugitive for years. You can't look out the window. You can't open the door. You can't do any of that stuff. The way I had to look out the window, you know the string that goes through the blinds? That tiny little hole? If you catch it at just the right angle, you can see who's at the door. On this particular morning, I pulled the shade up. Didn't even think about it. Task force. And it was like, drop the shade. Too late. Boom, in the door they came. And rightfully so. If I went to pray, I would have deserved it. But again, God put me here. I escaped all that. I don't know how. I don't know why. God's ways, His reasons. All I had to do was show up to this work. And I had to be backed into a corner. Chris mentioned second surrender. I understand the surrender to alcohol. I'm all for it. But I want to manage my own life. It's an illness we have. To want to manage our own lives. And we give it a shot, and we have a great program that shows us when we're doing it and tells us how to respond. You know, okay. What if Bill didn't meet Bob? You know? My sponsorship line goes right back to Dr. Bob. Now, what's that mean? Nothing. Unless I work the program, I'm pretty confident I'm working the program properly. But is that tidbit of info going to keep me sober? No. It could have the opposite effect and give me a little shot of spiritual pride, which is really dangerous around here. Not that it's our job to point it out when we say it. Because that's even worse. Anyway, this call led him to Dr. Bob. House and the home in jeopardy, wife, all that. He saw no way out, for he had earnestly tried to escape. Painfully aware of being abnormal somehow, he didn't fully realize what it meant to be alcoholic. And neither did I. Do you? Do we? Does everybody in here know what it means to be alcoholic? It's not a good diagnosis. It's not a casual illness. When our friend related his experience, the man agreed that no amount of willpower he might muster could stop his drinking for long. A spiritual experience, he conceded, was absolutely necessary, but the price seemed high upon the basis suggested. It's like, I don't know, man. I'm dying. My house is in disarray. My children are a mess. My wife's ill. I don't know. He told how he lived a constant worry about those who might find out about his alcoholism, right? Like nobody knew. He had, of course, the familiar alcoholic obsession that few knew of his drinking. Why, he argued, should I lose the remainder of my business only to bring still more suffering to his family by foolishly admitting his plight to people from whom he had made his livelihood? He would do anything, he said, but that, right? His illness is giving him excuses, like it's happened to all of us at different times. He would do anything but that. His illness was speaking to him. Being intrigued, however, he invited our friend Bill to his home. Sometime later, and just as he thought he was getting control of his liquor situation, he went on a roaring bender. I think he went to Atlantic City. For him, this was the spree that ended all sprees. He saw that he would have to face his problems squarely, that God might give him mastery. One morning he took the bull by the horns and set out to tell those he feared what his troubles had been. He found himself surprisingly well received and learned that many knew of his drinking. Stepping into his car, he made the rounds of people he had hurt. He's out there setting things straight. Bill had spoken to him of this program, which he thought was too much of a price. Until he was backed so far into a corner, he saw no way out but to get involved in his own recovery. And this is a guy, within days, he's out there making amends. He trembled as he went about, for this might mean ruin, particularly to a person in his line of business. He was a doctor. And he was going to go out there and he was going to make amends to the best of his ability and set things straight. How many of us are walking around with unfinished amends right now that we could be making, we could be setting straight, and we're not? And we think it has nothing to do with whether we drink or not. That's a question, you don't need to answer it. You know the answer. Don P. said more alcoholics die behind unfinished amends than perhaps anything else. I've heard countless men come into meetings say, I did everything Alcoholics Anonymous asked me to do and I got drunk. And after the meeting, I'll pull them aside and ask them a few questions. And it's not to give them the business, put them in the spotlight. It's just to get clear on something. I'll ask them. Maybe they'll get clear on it. Did you, to the best of your ability, go out there and make your amends and clean up the past? Never once was the answer yes. Never. It says something to me. Talk about like a step a year. You hear that nonsense. Oh, I'll do a step a year. I'm just doing 1, 2, and 3. Just all kinds of silliness. That stuff wasn't going on in this. The fellowship was a group of people, right? Fellowship of the Spirit. It's those of us that are working the steps and sharing our experience and helping each other in that regard. Do we go to the diner? Yeah, sometimes. Jimmy and I went to the diner earlier. But like if I wasn't working on my own recovery and made a life out of that, that's my life. It starts with a response to alcoholism, and my day ends with a response to alcoholism, and I respond to my alcoholism throughout the day with all the tools the program gives me. That's the bond that guys like Jimmy and I, or Chris and I have, and me, my friend Peter, or anybody else I can call. I got guys all over the country I can call. And when I call, they know what the call's about. We'll get to small talk later. One morning he took the bull by the whip. He goes around, he's making amends. He's worried about it. At midnight, he came home exhausted. Midnight. This man's all day long driving around making amends to people that he had harmed. Man, time's flying. It takes 1/2 an hour to read this chapter. We'll see if we can make it. I'll just keep reading. I won't say another word. At midnight, he came home exhausted but very happy. He has not had a drink since. As we shall see, he now means a great deal to his community. This is Dr. Bob. And the major liabilities of 30 years of hard drinking have been repaired in 4. All right? So the amends process may take a bit. You know, I remember going out and making amends. The first few, I mean, aside from my, within arm's reach, the people closest to me, I had to go out and make some really tough amends. I was an armed robber, Anyway, I went out and did all that stuff. I had to get permission from my wife at the time because, I'm ready to put my Superman cape on and just fly around the neighborhood. And it was all for selfish reasons so that I would get some spiritual power. I wanted juice, I wanted to be in God's favor, so to speak. But anyway, that doesn't happen that way, really. It's not how it really goes. But I've gone to make amends where someone told me, listen, man, you could take your amends and beat it in so many words. But the truth was I got free. I got free anyway. And that's what the amends process is about. Now, I've heard I remember listening to someone say, man, amends is where the freedom comes, not for us, but for them. And it was like, yeah, man, like some real spiritual karate chop stuff to say. But it's not true. They may or may not get free, the people we've harmed. But we do. And if we don't, we're going to die behind it. Right? So this guy comes home at midnight, exhausted but very happy. He has not had a drink since. As we shall see, he now means a great deal to his community, right? He's useful again. And the major liabilities of 30 years of hard drinking have been repaired in 4. That's the importance of amends to me. But life was not easy for the 2 friends. Here's 2 friends, man. They're starting the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous in the mid-30s, right? This is during the Depression. But life was not easy. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Both saw that they must keep spiritually active. One day they called up the head nurse of a local hospital. They explained their need and inquired if she had a first-class alcoholic prospect. A first-class one. We don't want the bum alcoholics. We want the first class, the really drunk ones. She replied, yes, we've got a real corker. He's just beaten up a couple of nurses, goes off his head completely when he's drinking, but he's a grand chap when he's sober. I like to think of myself as a grand chap when I'm sober. Though he's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months. Can anybody relate to that? At the end of my drinking, I would check in because I ran out of gas. And then I'd realize that I was in a mental ward with people who were seriously ill. With the grippy socks and the backs flapping open, and I'm sitting there like, how did I get here? Failure to launch. He's been here 8 times. Understands he was once a well-known lawyer in town. But just now, we've got him strapped down tight. He's strapped down to the bench. This was Bill Dotson, the man on the bed that you see in that poster. Maybe you'll see it in a clubhouse on a poster or something. Here was a prospect, all right, but by the description, none too promising. Right? Here's another unlikely suspect. The use of spiritual principles in such cases was not so well understood as it is now. But one of the friends said, put him in a private room. We'll be down. Now, when you went into a private room in the hospital, it meant serious business. 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the strangers beside his bed. Who are you fellows and why this private room? I was always in a ward before. Said one of the visitors, we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. See, up until the point that I met my sponsor, I was untreated. I had no response for the things that my mind told me. I had recovered from drinking because God's grace, God is very kind. If the thought of a drink were to come to me, I'd be gone. You wouldn't see me again. So God's grace kind of filled in the cracks, kept me sober so that I could be around long enough to meet my sponsor. So we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. Hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, oh, but that's no use. Nothing would fix me. I'm a goner. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here. Anybody ever left a meeting and gotten stopped at the bar? Yeah. I went to 180 meetings in 90 days, and I left a meeting and went to a bar and got drunk. I'm afraid to go out of the door. I can't understand it. He was afraid to leave the hospital. I was afraid to leave my house. For an hour, the 2 friends told him about their drinking experiences. Over and over, he would say, that's me, I drink like that. I need to identify with somebody if I'm working with them. They need to have a drinking history. I need to know that I'm working with an alcoholic. Otherwise, we really don't have anywhere to go. And the likelihood of you doing any of the things that the book suggests, the things that I need to do to stay sober and that I, choose to do. It's like choosing to do it with a gun to my head. Step 1 still moves me. If I'm not working a program in Alcoholics Anonymous, I have a step 1 problem. If I'm not out there making my amends, I have a step 1 problem. If I'm not 10th stepping with people, I have a step 1 problem. If I'm not praying and meditating, I have a step 1 problem. If I'm not working with others, I have a step 1 problem. For an hour, the 2 friends told him of their drinking, blah, blah, blah. The man, blah, 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 it doesn't say that, but the man in the bed was told of the acute poisoning from which he suffered, how it deteriorates the body of an alcoholic and warps his mind. There is much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. Chris talked about that. I am not drinking today, and I can relate to it. He doesn't know it, but one of his talks helped me to get a better understanding of alcoholism a long time ago. Waking up in the morning so poisoned with alcohol that I'm like this. And, getting some water down and maybe a half a sandwich at lunchtime, and then that decision that I made, he talked about it earlier. And a little drastic, this not drinking today decision. And then on the way home, I'm thinking about what pub to stop at. The mental state preceding the first drink. Yes, that's me, said the sick man, the very image. You fellas know your stuff all right, but I don't see what good it'll do. You fellas are somebody. I was once, but I'm a nobody now. I've never met an alcoholic that felt very much of themselves that I've ever worked with deep down inside. I don't care how we portray ourselves. We usually feel lower than a curb, and we may dress it up by going to the gym and looking sharp or getting our hair, whatever. We just don't think very much of ourselves by the time we get here. From what you tell me, I know more than ever. I can't stop. At this, both visitors burst into a laugh. Said the future fellow anonymous, damn little to laugh about that I can see. Don't we laugh about some really screwed up stuff? I was just telling a story how we pushed a car over a cliff and thought it disappeared into the woods, and by the time we got back to Philly, we found out it kept on going and landed upside down in a hotel parking lot and burst into flames. You know what I mean? But hey, we got the job done. Who laughs about that stuff? We do. The 2 friends spoke of their spiritual experience and told him about the course of action they carried out. He interrupted. I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. I've prayed to God on hangover mornings and swore that I'd never touch another drop, but by 9 o'clock, I'd be boiled as an owl. That's some 1930s talk for really drunk. Next day found the prospect more receptive. All right, so they let him sit with that, and they came back. Found the prospect more receptive. He had been thinking it over. Maybe you're right, he said. God ought to be able to do anything. Right? God, everything or nothing. He's getting there. Then he added, he sure didn't do much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone. On the 3rd day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his Creator on the 3rd day. Like these guys were getting down to business, man. And how's it going in AA nowadays? Where's the urgency? On the third day, he gave his life to the care and direction of his Creator and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. His wife came, scarcely daring to be hopeful, though she thought she saw something different about her husband already. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. That was primary, to have a spiritual experience. And they weren't afraid to admit that. I've listened to people give an hour talk, and the word God never passes across their lips. Never. Like at conferences. And I'm thinking, and everybody's like, oh, man, that was awesome. Oh, yeah, there's great jokes. Like, yeah, if we were at a comedy club, sure. But where's God? Who's going to do all the heavy lifting around here? Me? I'm a push the car over the cliff kind of guy. On the third day, he gave his... Okay. He said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. His wife came, scarcely being hopeful. He saw that he had already begun to have a spiritual experience. That afternoon, he put on his clothes and walked from the hospital a free man. He entered a political campaign, making speeches, frequenting men's gatherings, places of all sorts, often staying up all night. He wasn't avoiding people, places, and things. He was out there getting on with his life, showing up socially, meeting people. He lost the race by only a narrow margin. Okay, there's some disappointment. Did he get drunk over it? No. This man lived sober 19 years until the day he died in 1954. That's his story. That was in June 1935. He never drank again. He too has become a respected and useful member of his community. He has helped other men recover in his power in his church, from which he was long absent. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town. 3. Our fellowship was all of 3 men. Women to come, surely. But 3 men that had no idea that we'd be standing here as many years later, talking about the power of God and the 12 steps and the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And talking about how sacred it is to us, what it means to us, what it's done for our families. He had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, the way you fellows wait a minute, where are we at? Never mind. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town who now felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. After several failures to find others, a 4th turned up. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow. This guy's name was Ernie G. A devil-may-care young fellow whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. They were deeply religious people. Much shocked by their son's refusal to have anything to do with the church, he suffered horribly from his sprees. But it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. He seemed hopeless. He consented, however, to go to the hospital, where he occupied the very room recently vacated by the lawyer. Now, Dr. Bob, being a doctor, has got a plug-in at this hospital. He had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, the way you fellas put this spiritual stuff makes sense. I'm ready to do business. I guess the old folks were right after all. So one more was added to the fellowship. At this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident remained in that town. He hung around Akron, Ohio, Bill, for a while, for months. He was there 3 months. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, the lawyer, and the devil-may-care chap. These men have found something brand new in life, though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they were to remain sober. That motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. They shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted their spare hours to fellow sufferers. They were willing by day or night to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterward. They grew in numbers. They experienced a few distressing failures, but in those cases they made an effort to bring the man's family into a spiritual way of living, thus relieving much worry and suffering. Right? They had a sense of purpose, and they were able to introduce Al-Anon to the family. Because honestly, Al-Anon should be 5 times larger than Alcoholics Anonymous, statistically. Because they say that's the mother-in-law statistics on how many people are directly affected by an alcoholic and his cups, or her cups. And sadly, Al-Anon's a tough sell. A year and 6 months later, these 3 had succeeded with 7 more. Seeing much of each other, right? A year and a half later, these 3 had succeeded with 7 more. A year and a half later, now there's 10. I mean, if this is not a God program, I don't know what is. Or God fellowship. Certainly a God program. Seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed, that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women, happy in their release and constantly thinking of how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. How much time do we spend thinking about how to help a newcomer when we walk into our home group? Or is it like, I want to go see Jimmy, and I want to go to the coffee pot, or I want to go outside and smoke, or I want to go outside and vape, or maybe I want to talk to her, maybe she wants to talk to him, because she's cute and he's handsome, you know what I'm saying? And there might be a new guy or a new gal sitting down, scared to death, and this may be the night that they're going to go drink. Or this might be the night that they're going to go put a gun in their mouth. And if nobody talks to me, that's what's going to happen. And we're just figuring, somebody else will do it. I was at Design for Living, it was my home group. It was a little while back, maybe a month ago, a month and a half. And, I was chit-chatting with somebody, and Cynthia comes up and says, go talk to that guy over there. And I wanted to say, who are you talking to? Don't you see? I'm in, you know what I mean? And I got a hold of myself. And it's like, well, who do I think I am? Happens pretty quick sometimes. And I went over and sat down and just started talking with this guy. And, now I'm sponsoring him. He had been in and out and had a bunch of years together, and now he's got a few months. And it's like, I would have gave up that to have some small talk, shucking and jiving with somebody in the home group. And I wouldn't even have known it, And it's not to be missed. Outsiders became interested. Oh, wait a minute, here we go. This is these little meetings that would pop up in people's houses once a week. Aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object was to provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems. This was the prime purpose of the gatherings, the meetings in the beginning, where a new person might bring their problems. And here we are, man, can you believe they shared this? You weren't on topic. You know what I mean? All this thuggery, man. And meetings were supposed to be a place where new people could bring their problems. Like, we got problems, man. We're alcoholic. You go to an AA meeting, I expect you to be screwed up, man. You got problems, bro. Jeez. Outsiders became interested. One man and his wife placed their large home at the disposal of this strangely assorted crowd. We're strangely assorted around here. This couple has since become so fascinated that they have dedicated their home to the work. The work. They didn't say meetings, the work. Like these guys, they were working on spiritual work. You come in, we're going to work on these steps. We're going to begin to recover. I think we've gotten very fellowship heavy, like hanging out heavy, and spiritual work light. And then this reemergence of the big book has come around and turned things around in some regards. But if there's any of us sitting here tonight in this meeting and we don't have a sponsor and we're not working with this big book and going through these steps, I think we got a real problem. Bless you. Many distracted wife has visited this house to find loving and understanding companionship among women who knew her problem. To hear from the lips of their husbands what had happened to them, to be advised how her own wayward mate might be hospitalized and approached when next he stumbled. Right? The charitable offering of a space to us so that we could meet these people. Many a man, yet dazed from his hospital experience, had stepped over the threshold of that home into freedom, into our arms. Many an alcoholic who entered there came away with an answer. He succumbed to that gay crowd inside who laughed at their own misfortunes. Wow. It's been an hour. Jibber jabbering. The expression on the faces of the women, that indefinable something in the eyes of the men, the stimulating and electric atmosphere of the place conspired to let him know that there was haven at last. The very practical approach to his problems, the absence of intolerance of any kind, the absence of intolerance. Now, are we able to be tolerant of the alcoholic that speaks off topic, maybe comes in drunk, doesn't act right, doesn't dress right? You know? You see the ladies coming in a little scantily clad. One of the recovered women in that room might want to go say, listen, honey, don't lead with the chin. Like if I see a guy come in and he's like Dash Riprock, you know what I mean? He might be a guy I might want to approach and say, what's up, brother? How you doing, really? You know, we can spot ourselves when we're suffering. You know what I mean? Anyway, what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go to page 164 because my time is up. I don't want to go over, it's late. So I would encourage everybody in here to finish out reading this chapter. There's another page to read. It's not like you're missing out on the secret handshake or anything, believe me. Still you may say, but I will not have the benefit of contact with you who write this book. Right? He didn't have any idea where this was headed. We cannot be sure. God will determine that. So you must remember that your real reliance is always upon Him. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. This is the guy that wrote the big book, says he knows only a little. So how many of us think we really know, we know the score? Because we've been through the steps. I've been through the steps at least 12 times. Do I know the score? Here's a guy who wrote the book, says we know only a little. I never knew I could be so wrong about so much until I started working with the big book and trying my best to live a spiritual life. Where are we at? We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick or the woman. The answers will come if your own house is in order. But obviously, you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right. Him is capitalized. Make sure our relationship with God is right. And great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Thank you.